We start it off with talking about the importance, I think, of understanding the difference between hearing and listening. We can't just hear, we have to listen. And to me, once we listen, then we have to act. And I'm a big action guy. The people who are on this know that for me, it goes well beyond, just talking, because I want to get off the merry-go-round and I actually want to help with the change. From a family perspective, I just wanted to kind of touch on that because I have two daughters. I got a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. And, one thing that I have kind of realized being around this and being around predominantly African-American players since having my children is that racism is definitely learned. Like, I just feel it in my heart of hearts that it's learned, and it's learned from the behaviors of others. And I think when you really look at children at their youngest, they don't see color. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. I remember being a G League coach, and, my oldest now, when she was about, 2 years old, I mean, some of her best and most favorite interactions were with our players. And just to see the glow on her face, it continues here at the University of Memphis. And even when I was with the Phoenix Suns as well, we had a family room in there. And I mean, her best friends were Jamal Crawford's kids and Troy Daniels' kids. And, just to understand that, I think, is huge. I also come from a biracial family in that my brother-in-law is African-American and my niece and nephew are biracial. And so I think, to me, it really hits home when you start to talk about that element. Not only is my brother-in-law African-American, but he's also deaf, so he can't hear. And, he's such a nice guy. I didn't find out until just a couple of weeks ago, and I just got enraged myself about a traffic stop that he had, and he can't hear. And so the police officer is approaching the vehicle, asking him all types of questions, and he has no idea how to respond or react to this. And what he usually does, we sign with him, is he writes things down, right? And so all of a sudden he's making these type of movements, and he gets removed from the car. And, that to me is it's unfathomable. I've never felt that way. Like Tyler said, I mean, with a police officer driving behind me, I've never felt, any type of way about something that could possibly happen. And so, to me, it hits home in that respect. And then when we talk about my niece and nephew, what also hits home is that I've had conversations with them about, one of them is in middle school, the other is a junior in high school, about how they're trying to fit in and trying to find their way. At times they're not black enough and they're not white enough. And so that, to me, is another form of racism that it's really difficult for these kids to navigate. That finally, we need to not just bring, identification to this situation here, but we need to act. And again, I think education is the tip of the iceberg, because once we educate, we need to develop a culture around this that creates sustainability. Because the only thing that, to me, that determines the success in this fight is going to be the changes that are going to help bring more African-American coaches, right? We talked about more African-American grad assistants. I mean, think about that. I don't think any of us had probably thought about that. And then on top of that, we talk about head coaches. I'm fortunate, obviously, to work for one of the 79 African-American head coaches, and on a predominantly African-American staff with predominantly African-American players. And I can tell you, it's been a wonderful experience for me, and I'm very fortunate to be working for Penny. So, to me, I think that I'm looking forward to listening, but I'm also looking forward to acting. And my wife will say she can tell the difference when I'm hearing but not listening. So, I'm very excited about this, and I know my wife is too. She's actually on this as well. We're going to do our part moving forward. So, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you guys for having me and just setting this up. To the speakers that have gone before, you guys have dropped unbelievable knowledge and nuggets, different ideas, and this has been a unbelievable platform. I've been on many calls, just like many of you guys, and I think at the end of the day, the more we can have these forums, the more we can, have this dialogue, the more comfortable we become, right? And really, everybody has said education, right? So you have to continue to educate yourself, whether you're white, black, whatever it is, continue to educate yourself and educate your family. You know, Jason talked about, you know, it's a hard thing and all those things as far as just learned behavior, right? So just continue to educate yourself, educate your family and friends. And then from there, in my mind, you know, just encourage each other. And that's what we're doing right now. We're encouraging each other to not only speak about this, but to go out and act, as Cody talked about. And, you know, then from there, that's where you, once you kind of encourage each other, that's where the empowerment come in, right? And now you feel like you have a voice. You feel like you're in a position to be heard. And as we all know, you know, the more we do things, the more comfortable we become in those situations. And ultimately, that's where the evolution and change comes, right? And we continue to, you know, follow those steps. And just a couple notes that I've kind of took as everyone was speaking. Um, you know, Tyler, you talked about basically, in my mind, how certain things are taught and certain things are caught, right? So, you know, I have a 5-year-old daughter. I can explain certain things to her, but she's going to learn a lot of things by watching me and watching us and whoever has kids. So, you know, that, to me, that's something, you know, for everyone that's on this call, to be that example to your kids, if you have kids or your nieces or nephews or whatever that be, it may be. And then Richie, you talked about, you know, not using guys up. Um, and I have two gentlemen that are on this call. One recruited me in high school. Um, you know, unfortunately, I didn't go play for him, but Pat Everhart, you know, we still have this connection today, and that's from back in 2002, 2003. And those are the examples. And then the other one is Marty Wilson. And he recruited me to play at the University of Utah, and we have talks. I consider him, you know, mentor, confidant, and somebody that I can rely on. And that's the example in my mind that all of us can be, whether you're white or black. And you know, for me, I think just a couple of things for the sake of brevity. Um, this has to be a progressive thing, right? This is not a one-time thing in my mind to where you have these forums and have these settings. I think it's an ongoing conversation. And you know, whether you're a head coach, assistant coach, continue to have that dialogue. Have that dialogue with your ADs. Have that dialogue with your president of your university. I've had those conversations with my head coach, but more importantly, I told my head coach, I said, "Hey, I want to talk to the CEO of the company," and did that. And then, you know, yesterday I was on the call with the owners. So empower your assistants, or empower, you know, basically support your assistants, whoever the head coaches are, to just speak out. And then the biggest thing is you know, whatever your ask is, just make it sustainable. You know, whatever that may be. But you know, the people that are in power, you know, if it's you want to create a program or whatever it is, be intentional, be direct. No different than you go in to practice and you have a practice plan and you're like, hey, I want to touch this, I want to touch that. Be intentional on, you know, this is the cause, this is what I believe in, and this is what I want to do. And you know, the more everyone can kind of use their platform, I think at the end of the day, that's when it's going to be changed. Hopefully we see it, but at the end of the day, it's about the people that come behind us. And for me, you know, I have two kids, so you know, things hit a little differently when you start having kids, when you have to be that example. So um, you know, everybody joins the race at different times, but at the end of the day, if we all can kind of unite what we're doing now and move this thing forward and play our part, I think great things are ahead. So um, turn it back over to you, Brian.
Awesome, JB. Love that. What you said. It's about the people behind us, because it's definitely the next generation. Quick, one more question for you, Johnny, is just most of us are all at the college level, outside of Tyler, who trains NBA guys. Tell us a little bit about the group that you're involved with at the NBA level to kind of get some change going.
So really, it started in a smaller group. It's a, you know, basically it was a group of like 7 of us, and I mean 7 of us black assistant coaches, a couple head coaches in there, and it kind of established, I want to say about 4 or 5 years ago. And we just kind of started having dialogue with each other. And a lot of it was basically geared towards game situations, interviews, and all those things. And then when this happened with George Floyd, Lloyd Pierce reached out to everybody and was like, hey, like, we need to do something. And we literally got on a Zoom call like that. And we're like, look, we have to get the partnership with the NBA to use our platform, but we also have to unite with the head coaches, and we have to unite strategically and specifically with white head coaches, to where they speak out, and it's more of a united front. So I'm not sure how much you guys seen, but Lloyd Pierce has been the catalyst of that. And there's different head coaches that are part of the actual coaches committee. And we're doing everything we can to move this thing forward and use our platform. And obviously, there's no better time now, especially with the NBA resuming, to continue this dialogue, to continue this conversation, and use whatever resources we can tap into, because we all know the NBA has access to many things. So we're just trying to do our part and push this thing forward, and just use our platform at the end of the day.
Johnny, question that I've got here for you, man. It's been evident that we have so much to learn and just educate ourselves on when it comes to systemic racism and institutional racism. What can we do specifically in the coaching profession, as well as everyday life here, to put a permanent end to the injustices that we've seen for generations?
Great question. And obviously, Cody, you and I, have had a friendship for years now. Played against your brother, in college. And I think at the end of the day, it's really about what I kind of said, is just educating ourselves, educating our family and friends, and then just really be intentional on having those conversations. And they're tough. They're tough, right? And I think the time is now to really put that at the forefront. And you may not come up with the solutions, but just having that dialogue, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you be able to speak out about it. And to the point that was mentioned earlier, we're example, whether you're white, black, whatever it is. There's a lot of basketball players who look at white coaches as a father figure or a mentor, so all those roles and hats that we have to wear as a basketball coach are important. So no different than we're teaching our players, defensive coverage or a play or whatever it is, we have to be comfortable stepping out of our box, having these conversations and having this dialogue. And that only comes from, really wanting to act from within. And again, it's one of those things where it's going to take some time, but the more we do it, I think that's where the change ultimately comes. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go to your AD. Don't be afraid to go to your head coach or your president, because if clearly not every institution is focusing on those things. But if you can kind of knock on those doors and sit in front of them and express your concern, and that's all we can do at the end of the day, is educate them. And now it's one of those things where the people in power, they can't plead ignorance and say, hell, I didn't know. And then it's one of those things where it's like, okay, now, what are the actions behind it? At our level, like, it's one of those things where statements are good, but that's just a bare minimum, right? To say, hey, we don't condone these things. But now it's like, where's the support behind it? What are your actions behind it? And I think at the end of the day, just presenting those questions to your head coach, your ADs, like I said, and your president will ultimately impact those changes.
Hey, I'll share something also. Just you bring up like AD and you bring up these different forms. We had a Zoom actually, an all athletic department Zoom, and actually all coaches. I'm talking like everybody. And one of the African American coaches called out his boss for basically not listening. Basically, what he felt was like sweeping his feelings under the rug. And I mean, dude got emotional, and it was one of the most unbelievable things I've ever kind of been a part of there. Just like seeing that, I mean, it profoundly like affected me. Like, I was angry. You know what I mean? I reached out to the guy, I didn't even know him, and now we've connected. But it was, it was crazy. And then another thing, like you're talking about, like the dialogue. The more you have the dialogue, right? Something that comes to mind to me is also kind of the Me Too movement in terms of sexual abuse, and how once the dialogue became okay, right? It became easier for other people to have harder conversations and come forward, which is something that I think is important, because if you don't feel safe in the having these types of conversations, that's also how they get swept under the rug, and how you really don't understand how people truly feel.
Yeah, and to your point, real quick, Cody, it's one of those things where for us as Black men, we have to learn how to be uncomfortable in white settings, right? So now when you actually flip it and you start asking those questions and they don't have answers, now they're uncomfortable. And
Yep.
not to make them feel what we feel, but it's one of those things. It's a interesting sight to see when now all of a sudden, like, there's no answers, and what they thought was doing above and beyond, it's like, no, that's just the minimum. So that's really what it's about. And as we say, you put them on the hot seat. They put us on the hot seat. You put them on the hot seat, and obviously, if there's ramifications of it, then now you know where you stand. And obviously the legal stuff comes in, and with the racial stuff. But it's one of those things that if they're really, at the end of the day, if their heart is right, like Jason said, they'll hear you, like you said, but they'll listen, and that's where the change comes. So I'll get to my question. So with the current state of the country in regards to the social injustice, white privilege, systemic racism, what have you learned about yourself? And what have you done? What have you been compelled to do to implement change using your platform?
Yeah, I think, to me, when you talk about kind of what have I learned about myself, I mean, I've always known I'm not racist, but what's crazy is when you talk about the silence, right? In basketball as a coach, like I'm a see something, say something guy, and that's easy for me, right? It's easy for me to deliver critical feedback, good feedback, whatever it is. I don't really shy away from that. Obviously, most of you guys know me on here. That's kind of the case. But to me now, when you see injustice, I just have this swell of emotion in myself, and it's kind of like an awkward feeling. I don't know how, I don't really don't, it's hard to describe, right? But you want to do something. And in the past, you would see the same thing, whether it was the stuff that was happening in Baltimore when I was coaching prep school then, and I had a prep school student that was, kind of stuck in his house when kind of the rioting, all that stuff, and the unrest was taking over that area. He's kind of looking to me for some guidance and things of that nature, right? Like I could have done way more back then. So now, though, I feel compelled to let these emotions drive me to action, right? Because suppressing them is the same thing as obviously falling in line with the status quo. I talked about my brother-in-law and things of that too, but my wife's aunt, she actually runs a company that what they do is for 30 years, they've been going down to Mexico, and they've been building houses and trying to work on, not just the inequality from, the standpoint of like the monetary inequality and things of that nature, the income inequality, but provide people with actually dwellings to live in, right? That's a physical thing that you're giving somebody. And just to see how that's driven their life, right? I think that I've learned so much from that I can take and now apply to being around all these young African-American coaches. And, some things that I think that I'm looking for. Well, first of all, I'm on this group with Carmen Marciello from Siena, Coaches for Change. We're putting together a website. We're doing all this type of stuff. But, what is a website, right? Because we talk about education. So it's going to be a platform for education first, because education is going to empower you to kind of make a step forward and act. Because when we talk about what can be done, the policy level is where things have to change, right? We have to change it through policy. Well, I heard, a couple of coaches talking about how they just voted locally, right? I've never voted locally. So that makes me as ignorant as the next guy. I live in Memphis, Tennessee here, and I didn't vote in these last local elections. So I've got to kind of figure that out myself. It's not just about voting for the president. And then on top of that, right, to find out where you can vote, how you can do it, all these different things, to me, that's an overwhelming process. So when you talk about not just, black versus white athletes being registered to vote, talk about Latino athletes being registered to vote, talk about everybody being registered to vote, and then actually voting, right? I mean, it's unbelievable to think that it takes death, right, to cause change, but going back and back and back, it's like there have been so many deaths without change. So at some point in time, those deaths have to mean something. And, my plan is to help educate these players here that we have, but make voting a part of their DNA, right? So use your voice. And would venture to guess that 75% plus, right? We might not want to admit it, but we're not doing everything we can to vote to change policy, nor do we truly understand the issues. And one thing that I fear moving forward is the politicalization of the racial issue. That's what I fear, because I don't want it to become a partisan issue, right? It's a moral issue to me, right? It's not a question of right, left, this or that, because we know what's coming is the media giant now is going to push it one side or the other, and they're going to try to play it back until there's silence again. And to me, that is my biggest fear. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that isn't the case.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the voting. I actually just filled out my ballot for the primary today, and at the end of the day, we've had conversations with our mayor here locally as well. At the end of the day, everyone on this Zoom call, everyone can do something better, and voting is the start. And everyone thinks that every 4 years is the most important vote, but really it's every 2 years, and that's something that I've kind of dove into, and that's where ultimately the change comes. And I think the more and more we all get out of our comfort zone, the more and more we'll continue to grow, and we'll continue to learn how to be better and how to make change. And as I'm talking to you, I'm talking to everyone. Just I challenge everyone on this call to really just look within, and then once you do that, just find something that intrigues you to help impact change. And everybody has their own lane. Everyone is comfortable in their own situation. But if we can listen to coaching clinics and all those things, we can do this to have the long lasting impact. And all the coaches that are on here, check on your players. Check on your players if you haven't. It doesn't have to be, the black players. Some white players may want to speak out and they're a little afraid. So empower your players, give them the platform, let them know that you support them, and let your ADs or presidents know, like, hey, like, our players want to do these things, and you'll be surprised what come out of those conversations. So I won't keep you guys too much longer. I appreciate you guys' time listening, and on to the next beat.